Hello, we're here at COP26 and it's Energy Transition Day. I'm Naomi Baker, I'm a Senior Policy Manager at Energy UK, and I'd like to give you an overview of how the UK became a world leader in decarbonisation. So this is really about celebrating our success as a sector and looking forward to where we're going next. First, I'd like to go right back to the sector's origins. In the 17th century, a British invention, the steam engine, changed the world. History matters. The emissions from those long redundant technologies have contributed to the 1.2 degrees of warming today that's changing the world around us. And it's these cumulative emissions, according to analysis by Carbon Brief, that places us in 8th position in a league of higher emitter countries. Why am I telling you this? Because just as our inventions spread around the world and reshaped the way we lived our lives 3 centuries ago, so too can the net zero revolution that we, the energy sector, are spearheading now. The UK is a world leader in decarbonisation. Since privatisation, the sector has invested well over 200 billion in improving services for consumers and cutting emissions. Over the last 5 years, relative power emissions have fallen faster than in any other G10 nation. Our grid was built around burning coal, and this still accounted for 40% in 2008. But last year, coal accounted for just 2%. And we had 183 days coal-free. Meanwhile, renewables have gone from 2% in 1990 to 43% last year, overtaking the share from fossil fuels. And during lockdown for short periods, the grid was operating at 80% zero carbon, which is something some people thought was unfeasible only a decade ago. By 2025, the system operator expects to be able to do this with a fully zero carbon grid. And last month, Prime Minister Johnson committed to make a net zero grid a reality by 2035. No other country has made so much progress so quickly, and our power sector transformation means that cross-economy emissions have halved since 1990. We're halfway to our net zero target. Beyond the power sector, though, emissions have barely changed. In transport, gains from efficiency and initial electrification have been gobbled up by the trend for larger cars and increasing car dependency and higher mileage. In buildings, the task is huge, and we're tackling it too slowly. 90% of our homes burn fossil fuels for heating. 15 million need basic insulation. The main government programme here insulated just over 2 million homes in the 8 years running up to 2021. But to be on track, we need to be tackling both the heating and insulation at the rate of 1 million homes a year. The old expression that an Englishman's home is his castle is probably worth paying heed to here. Whilst regulation has a role, change won't happen at the pace we need it to unless it's led by consumer demand. And to support a retail market able to develop attractive consumer propositions, we need a fundamental rethink away from a market based on short-term switching. So we're leading the world, but there's still a mountain ahead of us. Whilst not perfect, the UK government's new net zero strategy, which is the first comprehensive plan for decarbonising a complex economy, shows that it's aware of the challenges. And whilst it's light on the how, the direction of travel is clear. By 2026, no new coal, oil or LPG heating. By 2028, all rental properties insulated. By 2030, all new cars and vans will be electric or hybrid, and we'll have at least 1 new nuclear plant and 40 gigawatts more offshore wind. By 2035, all new light transport and heating will be free of fossil fuels, and electricity will be effectively zero carbon. So that right there is a revolution in just 13 years. Predictably, there's a small, albeit vocal, chorus of voices saying that it can't be done. But a decade ago, the same voices claimed that large-scale renewables were an expensive pipe dream, and that cost reductions were a fantasy from sandal-wearing hippies. Now, however, the futures market for low-carbon generation undercuts the wholesale price, meaning that those wind farms will lower future bills. Spurred on by our members, the UK government, at the centrepiece of its heating building strategy, pledged to make heat pumps as cheap for end users as gas boilers by 2030. And this, for me, is the nub of the UK's approach, and why I'm certain that with the right policy framework, the sector can turn its power sector miracle into a hat-trick across homes and transport. Why? Because at the core of this claim, as with the pledge a decade ago to cut the cost of offshore wind, is a call to markets, and this plays to our strengths. Whilst the UK nowadays is outflanked on making things, what we excel at, apart from wind, is creating dynamic markets. The transformation of our power sector boiled down to 3 factors: institutional governance, innovative policy instruments, and a dynamic energy sector that was willing to invest. In 2008, via the Climate Change Act, we were the first country to establish a long-term, legally binding framework to cut emissions. In 2019, we used this act to upgrade that target and became the first major economy to set a net zero target. Now we're using our leadership and our hosting of this COP to encourage other nations to adopt net zero targets. Underlying this target is a governance structure, a requirement to set 5-yearly carbon budgets which ramp up the reduction. And the scale of action and progress is assessed by an independent body, the Climate Change Committee, which advises on the lowest cost pathway. It's also important to note the role of independent economic regulation in achieving this transformation. Since privatisation, the energy sector has invested well over 200 billion. This is significantly higher than the investment before that period. And Ofgem has used its role to drive up investment at the same time as limiting the impact on consumers, who will ultimately bear the cost. Before the recent crisis, which has laid bare deeper structural vulnerabilities, such as a reliance on cheap gas, domestic gas and electricity prices were below the European average. So, whilst we need to move away from using retail switching as a proxy for consumer engagement, Ofgem's focus on promoting competition has improved efficiency. And by opening up the market to new entrants, it started to show us what a very different energy market, one based on services delivering value rather than commodities to the end user, could look like. Change has also been driven by innovative policy instruments, sending clear market signals. These have made the most polluting fuels more expensive, under the polluter pays principle, by topping up the EU carbon price. Combined with EU legislation, which has targeted the dirtiest coal, and UK regulation to end coal in power by 2024, this had almost pushed coal off the grid before this winter's gas crisis. Alongside this, the UK government has incentivised investment in renewable power. So this was initially via an obligation on generators to source an increasing proportion from renewables, and then via a reverse auction process, contracts for difference, in which projects compete on price to win a fixed price per unit. By reducing the risk for investors, this has cut the cost of capital, bringing down prices for end users. And whilst these policy costs were added to bills, the impact was offset by the success of earlier demand-side policy. So that dramatically improved the efficiency of appliances, white goods and lighting. So combined that with an installation programme that at its peak in 2012 insulated 1 million lofts a year, the demand-side policy underwrote the cost of the renewables, making it politically feasible. So my third and final factor in our transformation is the UK energy sector, and that's what we're here celebrating today. The growth of renewables over the last decade underscores the sector's ability to lever in private investment and create skilled jobs. In 2019, it invested over 14 billion and generated 95 billion in value-added economic activity. It employs more than 750,000 people, directly and indirectly. Our projects include financing and building the largest offshore wind farm in the world at Dogger Bank, and investing in green hydrogen, nuclear, long-duration storage, CCUS, and BECCS. The challenge now is to reshape the sector and deliver the future. So we need to undergo the scale of change that we've seen over the same period with mobile phones and personal communication. So this will involve massively scaling up the pace of new low-carbon generation, deploying millions of decarbonised assets into people's homes, many of whom won't be able to afford the upfront cost, and changing into a dynamic grid with a two-way flow of electricity and data, and one in which energy saved or deferred can compete on a level playing field with generation. All of this can be delivered by our energy sector, but not by using a market framework that was set up 30 years ago. Milton Friedman famously said that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. COVID-19 has caused disruption to the entire energy value chain, from generation to retail. The gas crisis is doing this all over again, highlighting the risk of basing our energy supply on volatile global commodities and of focusing on cheap supply without addressing demand. Whilst the priority now is to get through this winter and limit the impact on the vulnerable, going forward, the focus must be on how to do things differently. And we were really pleased here to hear Jonathan Brearley, the Chief Executive of Ofgem, at our recent conference, commit to reform the market. A market built around short-term switching doesn't and won't deliver value to the end user. We need a reshaping of the market, akin to that which has taken place for mobile phones and food, which places the customer at the centre. We need a sector in which everyone can have their basic needs met affordably, but where people can choose to pay more for additional services that they value. Energy UK's members can do this, but not within the constraints of the existing retail market, where consumer engagement is measured by the volume of switching. Instead, we need an approach that encourages retailers to build long-term relationships with consumers so that they can develop retail propositions based on what people want: warmer homes, lower running costs and zero carbon, rather than on a raw commodity with no value added. The UK is already leading the world in power sector decarbonisation. With the right market framework, our energy sector can transform emissions from our homes and our cars too. And just as our inventions spread around the world and reshaped lives over 3 centuries ago, so too can this net zero revolution that we are spearheading now. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day at COP26 and the energy transition.